Welcome to the Plain Talk Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Port. Later in the show, Congressman Kelly Armstrong joins me as he does every week to take your questions. We had quite a few this week, so stay tuned for that. But before we get there, I want to talk about something the legislature just did to the state auditor's office. Now, Josh Gallion, who is our current state auditor, he was elected during the 2016 election cycle. And since taking over that office, he has been, in a word, aggressive in pursuing his duties. Remember when there was a controversy over Governor Doug Burgum and he took a Super Bowl trip paid for by an energy company? Gallion's office went after the travel expenses of the governor's office. When his office also made headlines when they found that several state agencies, including the tourism department, were hoarding money in state funds, essentially accumulating millions of dollars in these funds while simultaneously going to the legislature and asking for more appropriations. Most recently, auditors, and in fact, Mr. Gallion himself was on this podcast just recently, revealed a troubling conflict of interest at the North Dakota State School of Science, including a conflict of interest between one of the vice presidents and the firm that vice president's wife works for, the vice president being former state senator Tony Grinberg, who's also currently a Fargo city commissioner. Not only was that conflict of interest not disclosed in an official way, but also when the auditor's office went looking for it, they say that the North Dakota State, and of course the folks at the North Dakota State School of Science dispute this, but the auditors say they didn't get the records that they were asking for, and they feel like the North Dakota State School of Science obstructed their access to the information. All told, I feel like Josh Gallion is doing a great job. I feel like the auditor's office has gotten more aggressive. They're taking people to task. They're holding the government accountable, which is the whole point of the auditor's office, right? The auditor's office is separate, its own elected office. I think a lot of people sometimes wonder, well, why do we elect the auditor? Well, it's to make sure that the auditor is independent. It's to make sure that the auditor, has a mandate directly from the electorate, and that, his job is to go out there and hold people accountable. So he's been doing that. But what's happened now is the legislature in conference committee made some changes to Senate Bill 2004. Now, that bill it's the budget for the auditor's office, but there's been some changes made to it that essentially got the authority that the auditor's office has to hold people accountable. There's a lot of changes, but and if you go to sayanythingblog.com, you can read more about this and see links to the bill itself. But essentially what they've done is they have said that the auditor cannot initiate performance audits of state agencies or the agency's blended component units or et cetera. They cannot do that without the permission of the Legislative Assembly or the legislature's Audit and Fiscal Review Committee. So essentially what they're saying is, auditor, you don't have initiative anymore. Auditor's office, you're not allowed to go out there and hold people accountable on your own anymore. And to me, not only is that problematic in its own right, what we want is an independent auditor, right? What we want is an auditor who can go out there and take the initiative, an auditor who can say, this is a problem and my office is going to look into it. Now, if we disagree with the job a particular auditor is doing, well, we have recourse for that. We can elect a new auditor on the election, or if it's particularly bad, we can recall a state auditor. Our state laws have a mechanism where you can go out and you can collect signatures and you can put the current auditor on the ballot. The auditor is accountable to the people. So if you feel like the auditor is just out there doing a crazy job or not doing his job right or what have you, we have a mechanism for that. But the auditor ought to have a job to do. And that job shouldn't just be doing what the legislature tells them to do. And yet that's what the legislature has done with Senate Bill 2004. They've passed this, right? These changes got amended into the bill. The legislature's passed it. And now it goes to Governor Doug Burgum's office for signature. Now, I hope that Governor Burgum vetoes this, and I'm pretty sure he can use his line item veto on appropriations bills. The governor does have a line item veto. He could go through and line item veto some of these changes that I was just talking about without denying the auditor's office a budget. And I'm hoping that's what Governor Burgum does, even though he was one of the people who, got some scrutiny from the auditor's office. I should point out at this point that when the auditors looked at Governor Burgum's, his office's travel expenditures, they really didn't find anything all that interesting. They found maybe we need some better reporting, but all in all, most of the expenses seemed pretty much in line. But I'm worried that what we're seeing from the legislature is retribution against the state auditor, retribution against Josh Gallion, because he's been aggressive in going after this. He's been aggressive in holding government accountable. He hasn't been sit back. I've seen some people say that, he's just out to make headlines. He's just out to get attention for himself. But, I mean, listen, you look at the findings of the audits that he's putting out, and it's real issues. And if they make headlines, well, then so be it. I don't think that's his purpose. He's not manufacturing things. He's not exaggerating things. He's not, fabricating things out of whole cloth. These are real issues that he's finding. And now we have a situation where it kind of looks like the legislature is maybe punishing him for it, which is not a good look given some of the other things that are going on in North Dakota politics. Voters last election cycle approved Measure 1, which was the quote-unquote ethics measure that the legislature has been struggling with implementing. I have not been shy about talking about what terrible policy Measure 1 is, but if we set aside the specifics of Measure 1 policy, clearly voters felt like something had to be done. Clearly, voters felt like the legislature was up to something and wanted to send some sort of a message to the legislature that they want more accountability. And so that's the environment that we're operating in, one in which the voters, rightly or wrongly, used Measure 1 as a mechanism to send the legislature a message about accountability. And what does the legislature do? They turn around and they essentially attack the statewide elected official whose job it is to bring accountability to state government. This is wrong. Again, Josh Gallion's been doing a great job. I don't know if he's going to run for re-election or not next cycle. I'm not sure if he's made up his mind or not about whether or not he's going to run. I hope he does run again. And if he runs again, I think he'll win. Because I think he's been doing a good job. And I think what the legislature is trying to do here is wrong. And I hope Governor Burgum vetoes, at least line item vetoes, this bill. And allows the governor to continue, allows the auditor to continue to be independent, to, continue to exercise some autonomy in what they're going to look into. Because if it's just, if the auditor is just going to be a lackey for the legislature, then what's the point? Why even elect an auditor? Why even have an auditor at that point? My segment with Kelly Armstrong, up next. This episode of the Plain Talk Podcast is brought to you by Energy of North Dakota. Oil and natural gas from North Dakota strengthens all of America. And through our abundance of talents, innovations, and technologies, energy responsibly produced here translates to worldwide economic stability. With producers and our communities working together, we're securing a sustainable future that generation after generation can build on. It's all happening right now with Energy of North Dakota. Learn more at energyofnorthdakota.com. Congressman Kelly Armstrong joins me now, as he does every week, to take your questions. Remember, if you want to submit questions for these segments, we record them on Thursdays. They publish on the podcast on Fridays. You can send those in to rob@sayanythingblog.com, on social media as well, Facebook and Twitter. I put up open threads. If you're following me there, which you should be, you could submit questions there on the day of, and I will read them to Kelly when he's on. And Kelly's on now. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Rob.
You've been on these past 2 weeks. Kevin Kramer, who also does these, he's been out. He had some scheduling stuff these last 2 weeks, but you've been sticking to it. And not only have you been doing these, you've done 3 actual in-person, face-to-face town halls as well. Tell us, how'd those go?
Yeah, it's been really good. With between weather and a lot of different things that have happened this winter, we've had to reschedule and cancel some things. So we did a town hall in Hillsboro. We talked to a political science class at NDSU, and we did a town hall in Valley City last night. They were all well attended. Whether it's this job or anything else, you're always worried that if you schedule something, nobody will show up. But we had good crowds. And I think probably the most interesting thing out of all 3 of them is we got almost no questions about the Mueller-Barr report. People want to talk about healthcare. People want to talk about ag policy. People want to talk about making sure we're protecting the North Dakota economy from the Green New Deal. Immigration always comes up, whether it's the southern border or farm workers or skilled worker visa questions. That comes up a lot. And so it was really, when you spend a lot of your time in D.C., it's really good to get home and make sure and continue to be reminded that the North Dakota people are engaged and they care about the things that are important.
Well, sometimes I think we get so fat. Well, I think I think the media makes its own weather, right? It's a bunch of political journalists on Twitter, and they're writing about what other political journalists and politicos and politicians are writing about on Twitter. And it's what, so-and-so said on cable news and so-and-so said on talk radio and on and on and on. And then you just kind of forget, well, we're supposed to be governing real people who have real problems, and mostly they just want to work and live their lives and have the government solve these policy questions for them like the government's supposed to do. And they don't really care about who called who what on Twitter.
Well, and I think that's really important, actually. Everybody that is in these positions has to understand, and I'll use Twitter particularly as an example because it's so combative and, quite frankly, snarky, that is not an accurate reflection of how the people in North Dakota are, how the people of the country are feeling right now.
Yeah. I see also that you are going to be holding an energy roundtable soon. It's going to be, 10 a.m. hold on. Excuse me. It's going to be Thursday, April 25th, 2:30 to 3:30 p.m. at Bismarck State College. What's your goal there?
Yeah, my goal is, we're wrapping up a legislative session, and everything about how we produce energy in North Dakota is I want to hear what the state first solutions are, what our companies are doing, what our regulators are doing, what our policymakers are doing, so I can continue to carry the message in D.C. that, listen, we've got this handled. We know how to do this in North Dakota. And I think it's important. I'm on the Energy Subcommittee on Oversight. I'm obviously on the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis. And I want to be able to get the information from the people who are actually doing it on the ground and make sure I can relay that message back to D.C.
Yeah, your inclusion on the House Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, that was the one we talked about previously where some people were objecting because, you've got a background in the oil industry. You're from Western North Dakota. Your family's been involved in it. You've been involved in the family business. You have your own investments in it. And people are saying, well, this is an oil guy. Why is he on there? But I think, again, it's indicative of the North Dakota pragmatism in this. Well, of course the people who are producing the oil should be a part of this, right? Why would you not want those voices? The people who hate oil, their voices should count too. Like everybody's voices count. You put everybody in a room, you talk it out, and you try to find common ground. That's the point of this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that is just really truly a political narrative. Nobody's ever said I have a conflict of interest on the Judiciary Committee because I was a criminal defense attorney for 10 years.
Yeah.
It tends to be only the bad industries that have conflicts of interest and not everybody else. So I don't pay that any attention at all.
I've never heard anybody object to putting a teacher. Yeah, I've never heard anybody object to putting a teacher on an education committee. Nor should they, by the way.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah. All right. Let's get to some questions from the audience. First one comes from Don on Facebook. He says, do you see Speaker Pelosi moving forward on any bipartisan bills? As her hold over her caucus crumbles, will she capitulate and start impeachment or try to find legislation that will garner Republican support? Thanks for all you are working hard on.
I think that you will see some bipartisan legislation on opioid addiction, those types of things. I'm really concerned about the status of USMCA in the House right now. Just recently, there's a group of Democrats, what we would call moderate, reasonable Democrats, that are starting to object to the environmental regulatory portions of USMCA. That was obviously never part of the discussion prior to maybe some more outlandish claims this Congress. But we need to get that. That's the single biggest piece of bipartisan legislation that we have to get moving. It's our two biggest trading partners, which is Canada and Mexico, and it's incredibly important to the ag community. But there will be some bipartisan legislation, and I think I've told you this before. We do bipartisan on issues that are important better than I think people think sometimes, such as opioid addiction, the First Step Act last Congress.
Yeah.
But I don't make no mistake about it. Impeachment hearings have already started. You can call them whatever you want. But look at who's being subpoenaed to come into oversight in it, who's being subpoenaed to come into the judiciary. I mean, the fact that they don't call it impeachment proceedings doesn't mean they're not starting them.
Well, in the spirit of that question, let me ask a question of my own. It seems like every Congress, and I think Republicans did it, maybe not to this degree, but I think Republicans did it to the Obama. It seems, going back to the George W. Bush administration, maybe I'm saying that because that was really sort of the first presidential administration where I was old enough to really sort of engage and follow the news. But it seems like the job of the opposing party they see it as just to undermine the president's ability to govern. Not like I'm going to oppose your policy because I disagree with you and we're going to have a debate where there's going to be winners and losers in that debate, but I'm just going to undermine your ability to govern by impeachment. I mean, maybe you could even go all the way back to Clinton, Republicans starting it with Clinton. How do we break that cycle? Because I'm getting really worried. I mean, at some point, you just got to say, listen, the president won the election. He gets to govern within, obviously, the checks and balances of our system of government, but he or she in the future perhaps gets to govern.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I by the way, I think Republicans probably cost themselves or did significant damage to themselves in a midterm election against President Clinton when that happened by waging a partisan attack and doing it without getting broad support. I think it's hyper politicized right now because of who our president is. I think I personally think the single best thing about President Trump is that he has disrupted a lot of the status quo in Washington. But I mean, this all feeds off of that, and we need to continue to work, towards these things. Because, like I said, this is not what people in North Dakota want to talk about. They want to know if we're going to get a trade deal. They want to know if we're going to get a trade deal with China. They want to know how we're going to help the ag communities that are really, really suffering right now. But it just seems more so. And I would just say this, typically, even in investigations, you investigate conduct, and it really seems to me right now that the entire goal of some of my friends on the other side of the aisle is to investigate the person. And at some point in time, I think Elijah Cummings is going to subpoena his kindergarten transcript.
Yeah, maybe. All right, let's keep moving. Jan asks on Facebook, when will legislation be introduced on illegal immigration and anchor babies?
One of the reasons President Trump had to go with this emergency order is because the chances of getting any legislation passed through the Democrats in Congress regarding any of this is almost, at least on the U.S. or on the House side, is almost non-existent. So the short answer is we have to elect more Republicans. But I also believe you need a constitutional amendment to deal with the scenario of someone coming across the border and having a child on U.S. soil.
Robin, I apologize if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. It's Roben. Robin asks, when will you support withdrawing funding to other countries when spending is so high in the U.S. and we have a deficit and large debt?
Well, I talk about this a lot, and this will go to border security a little bit too. We have to be sovereign in our borders, but we have to be global in our thinking. One of the problems is the world is a smaller place than it was even 10 years ago. And our role in the world needs to continue to work. What we have to do is ensure that we're spending money efficiently and doing things that are in the national interest, whether that's at home or abroad.
Sandy asks, can the House do anything to curb the radicalism in the Democratic Party, especially among the freshman class?
The U.S. House of Representatives is up for election every 2 years. And again, you and I have talked about this before. I think we sometimes get, and this goes to what you were just saying about investigations. I think the Democratic Party, if they don't like this president, should work hard to beat him in 2 years on the ballot box. And I would say the same thing as well. We obviously, if there's criminal conduct, if there's immoral, those types of things, we have to deal with it. But we focus, I think, too much on that. We have to work on winning elections and make sure we're winning the war of ideas.
Well, somebody, I'm assuming when she makes a reference to the freshman class, I'm assuming she's talking about somebody like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Like her or hate her, she won an election. She gets to govern. Absolutely. And at least with her,
I don't think she has. I mean, I am not. I mean, I obviously agree. I think she's incredibly. I mean, I think she's a socialist. So I disagree with every single one of her policy positions. But I don't think. I mean, I don't think the answer is. I mean, there's nothing you can do other than hopefully work to have a very good candidate that runs against her and beats her.
Jan asks, when will information be released on members who paid off sexual intimidation cases and used taxpayer money to do it? The taxpayers deserve to see the list and amounts. All taxpayer money spent is supposed to have public access. We need this information to make better voting decisions in 2020. And I'm assuming what she's referring there to is there were reports of members of Congress, and there was some sort of a fund that was being used to settle sexual harassment cases or what have you, and there were members of Congress. Where are we at with that? Is that ever going to be made public?
I hope so. It should. Well, let's start with two things. Going back may be harder, just for a lot of different reasons. I mean, I don't know what legal settlement said. I mean, this sometimes people get frustrated because I actually do have a legal brain, so there may be some problems with that. But going forward, this never should happen again. And if it does, we should be appalled to think that we would even allow it to happen ever again.
Yeah, it is a little frustrating. Is there any concern there when it comes to revealing some of that information? I mean, obviously, the reason why, and I don't want to, I mean, obviously it's not a good thing, but sometimes those issues are very complicated, and sometimes it can be a little frustrating just from the perspective of nobody got a day in court, right? I mean, nobody's proved guilty. I mean, do you understand what I'm trying to say? I mean, and also,
I do,
go ahead.
I agree with her that taxpayer dollars are being used for that. I mean,
that's true.
That alone is the litmus test for where it should no longer be. It should not be private.
That's
you
true.
want to go deal with a private settlement or whatever. I don't care if you're a congressman, if you work for an agency, congresswoman. It doesn't matter if you're going to utilize privacy as part of that conversation. Taxpayer dollars should have nothing to do with it.
Larry asks via Twitter, what is your position on giving felons in or out of prison the right to vote? Now, I actually wrote my Sunday column about this. Senator and 2020 presidential candidate Bernie Sanders was talking about this, and he was saying that even people in prison should vote. And I wrote my Sunday. To me, first of all, if you allow that, I got to think there's going to be some residency issues, right? I mean, people in the state penitentiary in Bismarck, is that their residence, the state pen? And are they going to skew that legislative district by voting there? You know, all of a sudden you have a bunch of prisoners from all over the state, voting in that one legislative. I think that's problematic. But also I think North Dakota does it the right way. We don't let people in prison vote, but when you get out of prison, immediately your voting rights are restored. You can vote again. Doesn't matter if you're on parole or whatever. If you're a felon, doesn't matter. If you're out of prison, you can vote in North Dakota. I think that's the right way. I think that's the right balance. What do you think?
You should not be able to vote while you're serving time in incarceration for committing a crime under any circumstances. But I think you hit, on the head. I mean, we have this conversation a lot in D.C. when they try and nationalize all local elections. I think it's a state issue. I think this is absolutely an area where states should determine how they wanted to proceed with the process. You have a better access to your legislators. You have a better access to the pulse of where people think. But I was a criminal defense attorney for 10 years. I believe in redemption. I believe in rehabilitation. I believe in punishment. I believe that I think North Dakota does it the right way.
We're going to continue here. Nat asks via Twitter, the Mueller report states that Trump and his campaign welcomed assistance from Russians. Rudy Giuliani says that's okay. Are you okay with that? Would you accept assistance from a hostile foreign country in your next election? Would you be okay if the foreign aid was to your opponent?
So I haven't heard of anything. I haven't listened to what Rudy Giuliani has said or hasn't said. I think it's important that when we start with questions like this to really, truly make sure everybody understands what Section 1 of the Mueller report said. And that said there was no collusion and there was no conspiracy between President Trump's campaign, and the Russians. That being said, I think one of the things that both sides should do a better job of, and I'll have the opportunity to have these conversations because of the committees I'm on, is recognize that Russia was actively interfering with our elections. And no, we shouldn't allow foreign governments to help candidates. We shouldn't we should do everything we can to make sure that we protect the integrity of that process. And that includes candidates as well.
Let's see. Next question comes from Brent. Yes or no, shut down southern border until wall built and or immigration fixed? If no, why?
No. I don't. First of all, you don't solve the illegal immigration process. What you do solve is you cut off the complete commerce between our two countries. And I think we really have to be careful about how we do that. The upper third of Mexico, first of all, is not controlled by the government. It is controlled by the cartels. We have friends in Mexico. We have people that actually we can work with to solve some of this crisis. What we do when we isolate them is we put them in a worse position, not a better position. Not the least of which is we end up punishing like North Dakota farmers and ranchers all at the same time. The problem with the illegal border isn't people coming across at our stations. The problem is people coming across in the middle of nowhere. So I think we have to be very careful that an attempted solution doesn't cause more harm, not just for us, but for those countries as well.
Twitter user calling himself The Dude asks, when will the REINS Act, REINS Act, be getting the attention it needs? Will it be retroactive?
Well, it's been reintroduced. I know Rand Paul and Joni Ernst, it's been reintroduced in the Senate. I don't know if it's retroactive or not. So hopefully I support the REINS Act. I definitely support the concept of it in that we give too much power and have continued to do this from bureaucrats instead of elected officials. And a lot of these regulatory decisions they are made have huge policy and economic impact on states like North Dakota, whether it's the ag industry, whether it's the energy industry. Waters of the U.S. obviously is a huge issue. So hopefully that they will take that up. We'll advocate for any part of that we can on the House side if we get it over to us. But we need to convince people that typically don't always agree with that philosophy of states first and reasonable regulation to allow a vote on it.
Kelly, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Rob.
That's it for today's show. Remember, new episodes come out Monday through Friday right away in the morning. Although that's not a perfect rule. As you probably noticed this week, I had one episode that came out a little late. But for the most part, I try to make this a daily podcast, and I try to stick to the schedule that I've set out. If you have any questions or feedback on the show, please email rob@sayanythingblog.com. If you're listening to this podcast on a platform that allows you to rate or review it, the more ratings, the more reviews, the more subscriptions to this podcast, the more likely it is that other people will be able to find it and enjoy it. So if you leave an honest rating, an honest review, and if you subscribe to the podcast on one platform or another, well, it really helps me out. If you want to send in questions for our weekly guests, Congressman Kelly Armstrong, Senator Kevin Cramer, use rob@sayanythingblog.com for that, or follow me on social media. You can find me, I'm Rob Port on Facebook and Twitter, @RobPort on Twitter, and you can find Say Anything Blog on Facebook and Twitter as well. Pretty easy to find. And if you follow me on social media, say hi, because I like it when people say hi. Thanks, and we'll talk again.